Good evening and welcome. I am Azazel, and this is part 3 of Japan's most haunted train ride. In the last video, we paid a visit to Jokanji, the final resting place of the women of the Yoshiwara Red Light District. In tonight's video, we'll cross over the final source of the paranormal activity on our haunted train ride, the Mikawashima train accident. One of Japan's worst train accidents, and some allege the cause of numerous ghostly encounters, a government conspiracy to erase a town's name, and possibly a vengeful spirit that might have caused it all. Today on Ghostly Japan. The journey continues as our train passes by Jokanji, and as we bid farewell to the unfortunate souls interred there, the temple disappears from view behind the modern high-rise apartments. Looking forwards, our next paranormal hotspot is just a little further down the track. As the platform at Mikawashima Station comes into view, you might feel a chill run down your spine as you spy a shadowy procession of misshapen figures shuffling along the tracks. It is here we encounter our final grim glimpse into the past, the Mikawashima train accident site. May 3rd, 1962, Constitution Day in Japan. It is a cloudy, moonless night as tired factory and office workers mingled with families heading home after spending a day off in Tokyo board eastbound passenger train 2117H at Mikawashima Station. The time is 9:36 p.m. as the passenger train's doors close and it begins to leave the station. They are 4 minutes behind schedule. Meanwhile, eastbound freight train 287 is passing through Mikawashima Station on the outer freight track. The freight train and the passenger train are both leaving Mikawashima Station in the same direction on parallel tracks at the same time. Approximately 350 meters east of Mikawashima Station, the freight line rejoins the main track. The signal on the freight line is red, indicating to the freight train operator to hold and let the passenger train by first. But the freight train operator fails to notice the signal in time. At 9:36 p.m. and 30 seconds, thanks to a failsafe on the freight track, the freight train is diverted onto the safety siding, instead of being allowed to rejoin the main line. However, due to the speed of the freight train, they are unable to stop completely before overshooting the end of the safety siding. The locomotive and the first tanker wagon derail, and unfortunately, as fate would have it, they jerk slightly to the right. When the freight train finally comes to a stop, the locomotive and tanker wagon are now blocking the outbound main line. This entire time, the passenger train has been traveling on the main line parallel to the freight train. There's not enough time for them to react, and 10 seconds later, the passenger train traveling at 40 kilometers an hour strikes the tanker wagon and locomotive of the freight train. The first 2 cars of the passenger train are derailed in the strike, and due to the geometry of the crash, also get shunted to the right. These 2 derailed passenger cars are now blocking the inbound mainline track. At this point, there are estimated to only be about 25 injuries and no deaths. An unfortunate accident, but a relatively minor one. Passengers on the passenger train use the emergency release handles on the doors and let themselves out. The passengers begin walking back towards Mikawashima Station along the tracks of the main line. The train operators of the freight and passenger train are busy communicating the state of the trains and the location of the accident with the signal office. Traffic is stopped on the outbound lines, but not on the inbound lines. Tragedy is coming in the form of westbound passenger train 2000H, leaving Minami Senju Station. At 9:42 p.m. and 30 seconds, passenger train 2000H is approaching on the inbound main line. It has been 5 minutes and 50 seconds since the collision between passenger train 2117H and freight train 287. The train operator of 2000H can't see that the path ahead is blocked by the collision until it's too late. He applies the emergency brake, but the train collides and smashes through the derailed train cars, of train 2117H. The tangled mess breaks through, and on the other side of the collision is a line of passengers walking along the tracks. And sickeningly, train 2000H runs them over one by one. The first car of 2000H is completely destroyed. The next 4 cars derail and fall to the south side of the tracks. When emergency services arrive, they describe a macabre scene of mutilated torsos, blood, gore, and severed limbs littering the tracks. Screams of the injured pierce the air as passengers cry out in agony for help. The 3 local hospitals are quickly overwhelmed with the sheer number of patients. The dead are stacked in storerooms, covered with simple sheets for modesty, as the morgues are overwhelmed. When all is said and done, 160 passengers died, with 296 injured. The Mikawashima train accident came to be known as one of the Big 5 post-war accidents involving the Japanese national railways. These 5 accidents are said to be the impetus for a number of safety innovations and reforms that ultimately led to the safe reputation that Japanese mass transit enjoys to this day. But it came at a terrible loss of life, and a lot of suffering and pain. As the saying goes, safety regulations are written in blood. Going back to the 160 dead, it's here that our story takes an abrupt turn into the paranormal, for there still is one deceased victim of the train accident that has not been identified even to this day. This is Itai Bango 88, or corpse number 88, the last unidentified victim of the Mikawashima train accident. In the immediate aftermath of the accident, the police set up a morgue where the bodies that could not be positively identified were held. Families and friends whose loved ones never came home that tragic night in May would come, hoping against hope, and realize their worst nightmare and claim their loved one. That is, except for corpse number 88. No one ever came looking for him. The police had a composite drawing done of his face and ran ads for weeks in the papers, hoping someone would recognize him and come forward. But no one ever did. As the weeks turned into months, eventually the body was taken by the good folks at Jokanji, until such time that someone would come for him. There are a few peculiarities about corpse number 88 that have given rise to a number of urban legends and ghost stories. One is the appearance and state the body was found in. The police noted that corpse number 88 was a man, likely between the ages of 25 to 30 years old. His height was estimated to be about 163 centimeters, and the police noted he had a round face. He was dressed in a dark blue suit with a striped tie, and when found, one of his hands was still clenched tightly around juzu, which are Buddhist prayer beads. The body had no wallet, identification, or anything that indicated where the man might have come from. In the absence of any explanation for who this man was, urban legends and paranormal tales have flourished. One theory holds that the man actually was not a passenger on the train at all, but in fact was standing on the tracks, deliberately trying to get hit in an act of suicide. The story claims he caused the first train accident between the freight and passenger train, and having died violently in a suicidal act, his spirit became an onryo. In Japanese folklore, yurei or ghosts can come into being if a person dies suddenly or unexpectedly, murder or suicide being especially common ways. Onryo are a type of yurei that are vengeful due to a lifetime of being wronged by persons or the world at large. Onryo are thought to be capable of causing harm to the living, even killing the living. This harm can come in many different forms, but includes accidents and natural calamities. So according to the urban legend, the man feeling suicidal due to some perceived societal persecution took his life by letting himself get hit by the freight train. Having died violently and in a highly emotional state, his spirit became an onryo and caused the second, much more deadly collision. This also supposedly is why the man's family has never claimed his body, because of the shame the family feels because they know the supposedly real reason for the accident and the deaths that occurred due to their family member. There also tends to be a lot of attention placed on the prayer beads found in the man's hand, that somehow they mean he knew what was coming, or they have some special significance. There isn't much to support this urban legend. The cause of the accident is well documented, and of the surviving rail employees, no one has ever mentioned anything about a suicidal individual on the rails prior to the accident. It seems like it's just as likely that the man was on the first passenger train, disembarked after the first collision, and was walking with the group of passengers on the tracks. And perhaps he was rattled by the collision, so he was rubbing the juzu, the prayer beads, for reassurance. There are a couple of more mundane explanations for the lack of identification. One is given the man was dressed in a suit, perhaps he had a lot of money in his wallet, and a criminal looted it from his body. Another similar theory is that the man was an Okinawan on a business trip to Tokyo. At this time, Okinawa was still administered by the US government, and thus Okinawans did not have Japanese identification, but rather US passports, which were quite valuable on the black market. Hence again, the man might have been the victim of a pickpocket. Both theories lack a really compelling explanation for why no one ever came to claim the body, though, and that is really the one part of this mystery that is unexplained still. This man, whoever he was someone's son, father, brother, boyfriend, or husband. A friend to someone at least, one would presume. Perhaps he was an orphan, a loner maybe. But based on the clothing he was wearing, it seemed he was coming back from work. So didn't his employers question what happened to him when he didn't show up for work the next day? Didn't a coworker think to at least identify the man? The police certainly made a good faith effort, even put a composite image of him in the newspapers, and yet nothing after 60 years. At this point, it's a pretty good bet that the mystery will never be solved. On the 1-year anniversary of the train accident, there was allegedly a mass sighting by the residents of Mikawashima of a ghostly parade walking along the tracks. The story goes that the stunned and shocked residents witnessed countless shadowy figures walking along the tracks in the direction of Mikawashima Station from the site of the accident. It was said that many of the shadow people were missing various limbs, and some were even missing their heads. Some claim that these ghastly apparitions can still be sighted at night to this day. Some also say that the pained screams of a man can be heard late at night near the accident site. Other accounts place agonizing moans at a nearby park, which had previously been the site of one of the area hospitals that the injured were brought to, some of whom did not survive. At the time of the accident, the town was named Mikawashima, but today, besides the train station, the area that made up the town of Mikawashima is split between a number of neighboring towns, and the core of Mikawashima is renamed as Arakawa, the same name as the ward. Some of the urban legends and ghost stories associated with the accident go on to explain that the tragedy was so traumatizing that the town of Mikawashima developed a negative reputation. Even the mere mention of the town name conjured up images of death and misfortune. Allegedly, most of the residents of Mikawashima moved away in the years following the accident, and in a bid to rehabilitate the area, the government erased the name Mikawashima from the map. On the face of it, this explanation might seem convincing, especially considering that the name Mikawashima was tied to the area going back to at least the Edo period. However, the reason for the name change is more mundane. About half a year before the accident, Mikawashima, amongst a select number of other towns, was chosen to participate in a pilot program to study a proposed change to the way Japanese addresses were assigned. In the first half of the 20th century, Japanese addresses lacked a clear and uniform method for how they were assigned and organized. This resulted in an inefficiency in Japan's infrastructure that became glaringly apparent as Japan began economically rebounding in the post-war era, during the period known as the economic miracle. Such inefficiencies desperately needed to be addressed. Mikawashima, being a factory town, made it a promising candidate for the pilot program, so on October 31, 1961, the first redistricting was done, and much of the outer portions of Mikawashima was renamed. At the time of the accident, the core area of Mikawashima had not been renamed yet, although its borders had already been significantly altered. On May 10, 1962, the bill on changing the addressing system was passed, coincidentally only 7 days after the accident. Further redistricting would chip away further at the core area of Mikawashima in 1964, with the final changes renaming what was left of Mikawashima to Arakawa in 1966. Today, other than a handful of stores in the immediate vicinity of the train station making reference to the old town, Only the train station bears the former town name, which had endured for centuries. Despite this, the urban legend that the name change was due to the negative energy associated with the accident persists to this day. The government erasing a town name to cover up a tragedy certainly meshes better with ghosts and phantom screams than an administrative redistricting project. The journey ends as the train pulls into Mikawashima Station. Our short 3-minute trip took us over one of the execution grounds of the Tokugawa government, by the final resting place of the women of the Yoshiwara Red Light District, and over the site of one of the worst train accidents in Japanese history. I contend that there are few places in Japan with a history of suffering and misfortune packed into such a compact area as the trip from Minami Senju to Mikawashima is. If the ghost stories are to be believed, it may also be among the most haunted, and it's not hard to see why. Thank you for watching. In the next video, we'll be heading to the other side of Tokyo to continue our exploration of haunted places in Japan. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, please consider hitting the like and subscribe. Have a wonderful evening, and see you in the next installment of Ghostly Japan.